welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Originally, when Rohan and I were discussing about doing this discussion, it was meant to be amongst the other panels and keynotes and Boris Johnson at the Innotech Summit. And upon his request for pushing back the event to later in the year, I came back from Silicon Valley and I met with Ro, and I was like, what are we going to do? He says, we have to do this discussion, Jen. We can't wait. And particularly in the last 4 years that I've been here working in tech, and from what I'd learned after living or being in San Francisco for the last 4 months, I've learned a big lesson that the indignation of technology, its critics, are just as important as those that are advocating it. So you're right, Rohan. We absolutely needed to have this discussion today. And I've, from the events from the West Coast to the East Coast to London, being here, I've heard it all. We need more women coding. There's a huge gap in the market for aerospace engineers. And I'm very aware of the doomsday prophecy of Jean von Neumann's year of singularity, 2045, the single hypothetical moment in time where artificial intelligence will far surpass human intelligence, therefore radically changing everything in human, civilization as we know it, right? So the good news, it's just 2014. We got some time. Don't worry. The lesser good news, we're already in the thick of it. So the Innotech Summit brings together policymakers, entrepreneurs, investors, and corporates to kind of talk about, the big purple elephants in the room. Last year we ran a few policy panels from SME to IPO, a full-on education policy panel. So it is very much a passion of mine that we come here together to talk about what we can do to work with government to set that framework. Because I've heard it all. There's all these different events. And the reason why you're all here today, and while these guys are 4 constituents of the Innotech Summit, the entrepreneur Rohan Silva, our corporate technologist Ollie Whitehouse, our amazing policy and very, very brave policymaker MP George Freeman, and our investor, Sherry Kuto. They've all come here and given their time to talk about this discussion. And without further ado, I want to start this. But first, thank you very much, NCC Group. Thank you. And Tech City Insider. Without you guys, we wouldn't be here. A very loving, warm thank you to London and Partners. You guys are awesome. Fieldhouse Associates, thank you. SendGrid and Sovereign Strategy. I am very blessed to have these great partners. And tonight, let's start with this panel discussion by going around and kind of just saying a few thoughts on where you guys stand. I'll start with Ollie. Ollie, if you don't mind, give us your feedback and set up the landscape for what you think is going on in the job market and where you are as a cybersecurity technologist.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, we suffer an interesting problem where we're a niche within a niche. So there's technology generally, and then we're cybersecurity technologists within that. So we have, huge amounts of pressure, firstly in terms of finding skill set, and then also as we've tried to look to kind of gender rebalance the team, more generally encouraging females to come into our industry. There's a misconception for those that we've successfully attracted. They've typically come from the pure sciences, so like mathematics and similar, rather than comp sci or what I would consider a historical kind of breeding ground for our talent. When we discuss with them kind of why are their peers not attracted to our industry more broadly in our niche, there's a misconception almost that technologists aren't social, or they don't get to use some of their softer skills, which I think there's definitely a preference to do so. And we really have to go through the kind of the education piece that as a consultancy, we deal with customers, and customers are typically panicked when they deal with us for a variety of different reasons. And having that kind of empathy and those soft skills is actually a huge positive in what is a highly technical, highly fast-paced, and ever-evolving kind of subset of what we do.
Rohan.
Thank you. Well, I want to start, before we start debating things, I want to say something, first of all, that I think is undebatable, which is whatever happens with technology, replacing jobs or not, Jennifer, I think you will never be replaced by technology. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for all that you do to bring the tech scene, the entrepreneurial scene in London and other cities together. You really are such a catalyst for so much that is good in this city. So it's a great pleasure. Thank you. So I until last year, worked for the Prime Minister, worked in policy, and I left to try and earn an honest living as an entrepreneur. But all too often what happens in Westminster, I think, is that people debate the symptoms of change rather than the underlying drivers of change. And this debate, I think, is really important because it gives us an opportunity to think about and talk about the underlying structural shift. And this structural shift, I think, is also undebatable. Moore's law is driving the steady, exponential improvements in technology and computing power. And in turn, what that means is that technology is increasingly moving up the value chain of the labor market. As Tyler Cowen, the American economist who wrote great books like The Average is Over and The Great Stagnation, puts it, technology previously replaced brawn. It replaced blue-collar jobs in the 70s and 80s. It's increasingly replacing brains. So it's increasingly software, algorithms, increasingly eating into sectors like law and accountancy, increasingly into certain areas of research. And of course, also areas like driving with self-drive cars coming down the track. So areas that were the unique preserve of us humans and our brains are increasingly the preserve of technology. So what does all that mean? Well, there's a big debate that goes on in Westminster and in America to do with the stagnation of middle class incomes, the squeezed middle, some people call it. Well, that bifurcation of the labour market, many economists are attributing, at least in large part, to technology. And I think the question that stands before us is, what is the right response to that kind of shift, to that bifurcation of the labour market? Because there is, I think, a very profound divide in politics today when it comes to that question. There are some who say, well, the right response to that kind of rising inequality is greater redistribution. But I think there's an argument for saying, actually, will that deal with the underlying causes of that trend? How might we respond in a way that's potentially more proactive, potentially leaves more people better placed to benefit from that technological trend? And I think there's a real opportunity there. Garry Kasparov, when he lost to Deep Blue, the IBM computer, said very, very memorably and very, very beautifully, I think, we might not be able to upgrade our hardware, he said, but we can have a go at upgrading our software. In other words, skills can play a profound role in enabling more people to benefit from technology rather than lose out from technology. And obviously this is something that we can debate, but just in sum, there are three quick areas in particular where I think the skill system, where there's more work to be done. The first, of course, is on computer coding and computer science, enabling more people to get those new jobs that are being created. And in that bifurcation of the labour market, you see the third biggest category of new jobs being created are in IT. And they pay on average £18 an hour, over double the average national wage. So the more people that can get those jobs, and jobs like that, the better for all of us. And there are lots and lots of those jobs being created. The second thing that I think we can do is really double down on creativity and the creative industries in this country. Because as smart as technology is getting, as intelligent as machines are increasingly becoming, they're still really, really crap at creative acts. They're still not very good at designing a dress or coming up with an advertising campaign, designing a building. That still is a sacrosanct area for human activity, and I think it's an area, fortunately, of real British strength, and something that there's a lot we can do to build in that area. And the third and final thing that I think we can do as a response in terms of skills is to do with entrepreneurship, and this is something that George and Sherry do so much on. But the flip side of these technological changes is that the cost of starting a business and reaching a global market has fallen precipitously. It costs very little today to start a company and reach a global market. And that is a profound opportunity for Britain, for people who are being squeezed out of the labour market in different ways. And I think that if we reshape our skill system in those three directions, and there'll be others besides, I'm sure, but those three in particular, I think we've got a shot at, well, more than a shot, I think we really will as a country benefit from these structural changes instead of losing out. And we'll do it in a way that responds to the underlying trends instead of dealing with the symptoms. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity.
Thank you. Sherry, would you like to say something?
Thank you. So just a few things to build on what Rohan was talking about. If you talk about the fast-growing companies, I mean, it's only just a couple of weeks ago it was released that 100% of the net new jobs across Europe were created by companies less than 5 years old, which is really very interesting. And that was looking a little bit deeper at a study that came from the U.S. That found that was what the case was in the U.S. We didn't know that would be the case of what we found here, but it is. And if you ask the people who are running those companies what their number one problem is, it's that they cannot get the talent. The single thing that prevents them from growing faster is talent. So I think the thing that we need to think about is how we get them that talent. And if you're already unemployed, then you need to think of acquiring the skills pretty quickly that might be required for these fast-growing companies that could grow faster if you worked for them. I think it gives an onus to universities and also schools to make sure that the kids come out of there trained for jobs that will be, as opposed to the jobs that were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And that's a real problem. This morning, earlier, the Royal Society released research showing that there was going to be 1 million jobs created in the STEM subjects. There was other research just 2 weeks ago showing that the number of jobs created by app companies alone was currently 1.8 million, and that would rise to 5.8 million by 2018. So where are those 4 million jobs going to come from? So I think we need to turn our thoughts to those. Just on are they interesting jobs? There was some great research showing that 2.61 interesting jobs, were created for every job that was lost by these fast-growing companies. So let's turn our attention to the fast-growing companies. Let's not talk about small companies, because you remember Google's, was a very small company. We need to think about fast-growing companies, high-growth companies, scale-ups, because I think that's easier to act upon as opposed to, a SME. Because I think it's that some of them grow really, really fast. And the final thing I'd say as an entrepreneur, these technologies allow you to do phenomenal things at sometimes a thousandth of the cost, sometimes 1/10,000th of the cost for the same outcome. And anything that provides us with that ability, we should jump on with open arms and chase after it really hard.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry.
Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Jennifer, I wanted just first of all to start by offering a very warm welcome as your host here today. Boy, are you welcome here. And is everyone in this room welcome to this building? We need entrepreneurs in Parliament.
Thank you, George Freeman,
and politics.
for having us.
We really need the skill set in this room and the creativity and the entrepreneurship, the mentality. So come back as often as you like. I will always book a room and try and make sure we get as many other MPs and parliamentarians here as possible. You were kind enough to mention that I used to work in the private sector. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Ro and I have worked together. He's gone from number 10 into the private sector, and I've come from Cambridge technology companies into government. But it's a key point. We need people on both sides, and we need that conversation. So here's my message. So I've got my back turned to these guys here. My message to Parliament and government is really three things. Firstly, this crisis that we've seen here in the UK, 8% destruction of our GDP, through the collapse of a model of growth that was failing us, and has triggered a really traumatic crisis in government finances. We're now carrying £1 billion of debt, and we're having to deal with a massive structural deficit in the way we deliver government. The entrepreneur in me sees that as a big opportunity. This isn't a bankrupt business. It's just a business, if you look at it in business terms, with vast assets on the balance sheet locked up in some places where we're not delivering the full value. And I think this economic crisis is a wake-up call, and Britain is waking up really fast. We've gone from being the laggard in Europe with the biggest debt, the worst numbers, to the fastest-growing economy in the G20. Last year, more businesses started than ever in our history. 800,000 women now running their own businesses. Entrepreneurship really taking off in Britain. And I think that isn't a surprise. Crisis triggers opportunity. Entrepreneurs take a crisis as an opportunity. And this country is fundamentally entrepreneurial. And the people of this country, I think, are ready to get up and shake off the old model and really go for it. And I think we need them to, and we need entrepreneurship to help us scale this mess. I genuinely believe in 30, 40 years, touch wood, I'll be bouncing my grandchildren on my knee, and they'll be saying, tell us the story, Grandpa, of how your generation got Britain out of debt, out of a broken model of growth, plugged it into the world economy, made it competitive and entrepreneurial again, and delivered 50 years of a prosperous Britain. Now, whether Europe comes with us is up to them, really, but I hope they do. But we've got a real opportunity, and that's we should be optimistic about it. I think there are three things government needs to do. Firstly, I think we need to be honest about the failures of the government model, the sort of analog model post-war, more spending equals better services, top-down delivery, government telling citizens what's good for them. In my own field of healthcare, I think we're going through a profound revolution. Healthcare going from being something done to you by the government when it deems it necessary and affordable, to healthcare being something 21st century citizens take responsibility for ourselves. That isn't a call for the privatisation of the NHS at all. It's a call for a new mixed economy in which public, private, voluntary, but fundamentally health citizenship. And we've got to empower patients of tomorrow and the people before they become patients to take responsibility for health. And technology is absolutely fundamental to that. I think in 10 years, everyone will have their health records. They'll be visiting them like you today, visit online banking. I was the first generation that used an online bank account. I tapped the screen, wondering where my money was, wondering if it was safe. Of course it's safe. The banking sector has delivered phenomenal benefits through technology, and we can do the same thing in health, in education, in other bits of the public sector. Secondly, to do it, we have to make the public sector a genuine market for innovation and use every pound and ask ourselves, how can we help support Britain's private sector to drive an innovation-led recovery and deliver productivity improvements in the public sector? And the two have got to work together. We've got to stop the apartheid in which the private sector have all the fun with doing innovation and technology and efficiency and rewarding people who deliver more from less, unlike the public sector, which traditionally rewards people who deliver less with more, and we punish people who deliver, better numbers. We've got to build a much more entrepreneurial culture in the public sector and make the public sector a place where the private sector can do business. And there are win-wins for both. In healthcare, if we become the best place in the world to develop modern medicines, we get a new deal with industry. We don't have to pay top dollar. We're delivering something far more valuable than a price premium, which is where else in the world can you design targeted, personalised medicines? But here in the NHS. NHS patients get the drugs, we get a good deal, and companies here then raise money in the city and go global. And we can charge the petro economies and the rich economies around the world the top dollar for the drug. We're the people who developed it here. So there's a win for patients, for NHS, and for companies. And third point is you've got to build a supply chain, a creative entrepreneurial cluster, and that means not everyone is going to be a tech entrepreneur. Some people will just use the stuff. But the people who are going to be doing tech have got to be creative, to Rohan's point, and we've got to have children coming out not being taught how to use Google, how to design software, how to get the skills that really underpin creative digital economy, which is creativity, it's forensic analytics, it's understanding and questioning, and that whole skill set, as well as the financing and the culture. But unless we open up as a market that's buying and using tech, we won't be a good place to come and develop technologies.
Well, thank you. I want this to be a very interactive discussion, and I'm conscious of time. So I would like to ask the audience, if you, at any point you want to ask a question, feel free. I mean, is there something here that you want to be able to ask these guys about how job market is changing? Feel free to ask your questions. Otherwise, I want to ask a question. I was at the Spectator event last week, and it was interesting. Not one person was from the East London tech scene. So this is showing me that this is now moving out, that this is becoming an everybody problem. And we're all discussing, what are we doing about jobs? How do we, at what point, they made a good point with these driverless cars on the onset, at what point does government step in to set legislation for artificial intelligence and automated computing? What do you think?
I think typically they legislate when it goes wrong the first time is typically a reaction to a problem, and I think we've seen benefits from that. So if we look at high-frequency trading, that's been relatively light touch, and we've seen huge kind of innovation in terms of automated data processing, analytics as a result of that, because they haven't been bogged down, I guess, by kind of slightly draconian and overbearing kind of policy, I guess. So I think, the light touch approach is the right approach. I think actually for give London its credit, it's actually trying to get ahead of the curve and actually allow automated vehicles to be on the road, because they recognise that to become a city of the future, we don't want to necessarily have to have someone to come and ask for permission. Let's be kind of proactive about this and embrace the technology and provide the kind of the very fertile ground within which it can be perfected, because there will be a knock-on effect. We'll have the engineers that understand the technology. We'll have the builders that can put it together. We will have understood the kind of the impact on traffic management systems, and that's intellectual property that as a nation we can then export. So I think it's it's the right approach in terms of setting policy.
Sure.
Well, I just make this point. I mean, I'm genuinely in favour of less regulation, but there are two arguments where it can do good. If Britain, London, gets to be the place that sets the benchmark, the standard, the Greenwich Mean Time, the standard for whatever it might be, there's good evidence that you then become an international centre for excellence, academic excellence, and then policy, and then a technology cluster, entrepreneurs build up around it. And secondly, we are in a European market, and in my field of life sciences, medicine, agriculture, Europe is in danger of regulating itself out of business into a backwater. And Britain, actually, if we were stronger on the front foot and setting a more entrepreneurial and global legislative framework, we could actually stop them committing technological suicide, and we'd do our own economy a lot of good.
So I think regulation was one thing, but I think the other thing the government can do that I've been fascinated by this one is using their convening power to bring people together to point out what they collectively can achieve. And I think you can have some really, really high-impact programs that have phenomenal outcomes with very little spend. And so I know you just focused on legislation, and I think it's really important, but I think suggesting that the other magical power that government has that it can use is that. They can, encourage people to do things. They can bring people together and create some very interesting outcomes. I just wanted to point out data is one of the things that I think is one of the UK's blessings, and you'll be aware of the Zoopla float last week. That all started with the government data feed on sold house prices. And the fact that they released that and licensed it and actually co-created a service that benefited the entire population. I think the idea of co-creating rather than thinking of it as procurement is a really interesting idea and has miles to go. And it gets rid of some of the barriers that some people might think about. Oh, well, I have to buy from a big company. It's actually, you probably should think about buying from the really fast-growing ones, because if they're fast-growing and everybody's buying their products, it's because their products are really, really good. And you should think about what they're doing and who you serve and whether or not there's a match there, and co-create some amazing things, particularly in healthcare and education. And just one more thing on data sets. On the NHS's 4 or 5 years ago, some friends from Silicon Valley said, we're watching with interest what's going on in the UK, because the data sets that you have there, the massive data sets you have there, because of the way the industry's been structured because of the NHS, means that you'll be able to spot the patterns in the data for health way better and way faster than the US, which otherwise is structured for scaling. That industry here is structured for scaling above and beyond any other country. So we'll watching your space with great interest. And it will be an entrepreneur's dream, but moreover than that, it will be a patient's dream and a doctor's dream and a nurse's dream, because these tools that will empower them beyond their imagination they exist in other industries today, and they can be applied with minor tweaks tomorrow.
Rohan, in your movie, you talk about the robots that are coming. I mean, do you think that there's a fair bit of argument to say that the market will just realign itself, that certain process optimization will take hold, and that the gap that we're talking about, in aerospace engineers and what Ollie was speaking of, the shortage of skills, will this be something that we realign naturally, or is this something we're going to have to manufacture, with government and private sector involved?
So the film Jennifer's talking about is a short film I made for Newsnight last September, and in the film and in the studio discussion, we discussed these kinds of issues. And I think it's really interesting that you chose the title for the debate, Tech versus Brains, because there is a bit of a tension here as industries are disrupted, as technology replaces certain types of jobs. There is a tension, and the natural response, I think, of a lot of industries who are affected by that kind of change is to lobby for regulation, is to lobby for government to protect the old business models. And I think, to Sherry and George's point, Britain really has a big opportunity here, because if you think about the next election in 2015, the total amount of election spending will be, I don't know, £50 million maybe in total, because there's no TV advertising in the UK. Whereas in America, in a presidential election, you're talking about $2 billion or £1.5 billion. So the quantum of money involved in American politics is a totally different scale to British politics. And that means actually, although it might not seem like that from the outside, and there's lots of talk of lobbying and so on, the British policy conversation has the opportunity to be much more kind of rational and evidence-based and less driven by certain lobby groups. And that's a big opportunity for us to do the rational things, as actually the government is doing on things like the sharing economy. The deregulation of the sharing economy is the opposite of what's happening in a lot of American cities. And I think, therefore, there's an opportunity, at least when it comes to regulation, that while there are tensions created, and while some people are going to have to think about reskilling and upskilling and so on, all of us are, in fact, not even some people, all of us are going to have to think about that. Actually, the regulatory environment here could be potentially very supportive of that change, and I think, again, that's something we've got to make the most of, because that's a system we've inherited, and we get to, all of us together, get to contribute to a policy discussion. That's the opportunity to be much more rational, much more long-term.
I like what you say at the end of the film, how we choose to respond to this technology has the political implications for decades to come. And here we are facing with teenagers that we don't really know, at least I don't know what to tell them to study, because who knows what's going to be available in 10 years. We have a very special guest tonight, Lord Jim Knight. Could you stand up? Yeah. And you would like to say something. I saw you raise your hand. Yeah? Why don't you come and... Yeah, you're very welcome. Everybody is welcome, by the way, guys.
So the first was around the geography of this. I think London is a great city. I'm a part-time politician. The most recent election results, London voted very differently to the rest. And we need to ensure that the distribution of this work... I'm willing to believe there's going to be enough work as a result of all the change that's been talked about. But I'm not currently willing to believe it'll all be evenly distributed across the country and that everyone will feel that gain. And we need to see those communities that were formed out of industrialisation have a post-industrial future. And so we need to think harder about how we empower those. Personally, I'm of the view that HS2 is 19th century technology, and that we should first have a greater priority in ensuring that every home in the country is properly online with proper bandwidth, so we can work where is convenient for us rather than all have to have a relationship with the city to have a future. So, but there's a wider bunch of things around geography. Second is around education. I was a schools minister here for 3 years, and the last point that you made, Jen, around not being sure what to advise people what to study. We need to move from an education system that's about teachers delivering content to teachers coaching learning, because we all need to be able to be confident lifelong learners, because our careers are going to change several times. I'm on my 4th or 5th career at the age of 49. And that requires quite a different education system. Teaching coding is really important alongside maths and science and the basics, so you've got a framework of understanding. And what the current government's doing around coding is to be applauded. But if it's all about high-stakes tests at 16 and 18 and testing your ability to regurgitate content, and I'm as guilty of incentivising that as schools minister as anyone, then we've got a problem and we've got to move that on. And then the final one was I now work pretty much full-time in the commercial sector, but I also have a third of a stake in a social business. And in terms of what George was saying earlier on about bringing some of the excitement of enterprise into the public sector is right. But I think social enterprise and social business and Mohammed Yunus's vision and some of that is something that we should be thinking much more seriously about and designing into how we do government much more carefully.
What are your thoughts on that, panel? Any rebuttal?
That was quite fun. So I think you're absolutely right. I think in going back to schools and the skills shortage, I think, and governance in general, I think the recommendation I would have is look at those high-tech entrepreneurs around you. If you're a school governor, you should ask yourself which of these run companies or have run companies. They're all around. There is a very good distribution around the whole country of people who grow fast-growing businesses. Who's on your governor's work experience? I was at this school last week in Brentford, and the little girls were describing to me the work experience opportunities that were in front of them, which were not that exciting. Oh, no. So one of the things that I think we in industry can do is reach out and offer them some really exciting, really high impact, phenomenal work. I mean, given that our number one crisis that we have as fast-growing businesses is nobody to help us, right. We can reach out and find some really meaningful, very meaningful, high-impact things Absolutely. For them. And I think careers and role models. I think getting people from the tech community into the schools and the universities, helping them think about the impact that they're going to have on the world and helping them imagine the mark that they're going to make. Be that mark in a for-profit or a not-for-profit. I happen to think some of the most fascinating companies that exist or businesses that exist are the not-for-profit ones. And if you think of impact and lighting these kids' imaginations on fire on how to solve the problems that they are very aware of, give them hope and show them the way. And it's all around us.
Yeah. George, I want to ask you a question because you and I met each other. Oh, do you want to rebuttal on that?
No, I just want to pick up what Jim said. I couldn't agree more, but let's
You're
go a bit further.
Eye contact.
Yeah, we're having a cross-party moment here. So where does the kind of rubber hit the runway on that question of unlocking decentralized, non-London tech growth? Well, and similarly, in parallel, unlocking unproductive public services. Well, we need to unlock the talents of the localities much, much more. I'm a big fan of elected urban mayors. I think if we have more mayors, they would drive leadership through the cities. But my constituency is deeply rural in mid-Norfolk. Norfolk is, like many areas, we're going through a challenge of austerity. How do we deliver more from less? It's tough when you don't control your own resources. We spend nearly $4 billion a year in Norfolk on health, care, mental health, and the healthy mentally bits of welfare. But they're all delivered through silos, and nobody in Norfolk actually controls really any bit of the whole landscape. They all do little bits. And when you want to close that little bit, they don't like it. Yeah. But if you put all the people in Norfolk together who are involved in that economy and said, listen, we'll do a new deal with you. This is what we know you're going to spend over the next 10 years. It's going to go up. If you can reduce the rate of increase of the up, we'll split the difference with you 50-50 for the Treasury and the locality. You can reinvest your saving, not privatize it, reinvest it in social enterprise, in preventing disease, unhappiness, mental health, crime, drugs, the things that cost you money. Well, stand back and watch as the people who today are resistant to change, for their own locality, incentivized by an enlightened treasury, would start to deliver entrepreneurship in the public sector and say, this is exciting. Let's close that dirty old unit over there that's recycling unhappiness, and let's reinvest in prevention. The localities will do it. And I think then you also create a whole series of local markets for innovation and for social entrepreneurship, which would be all to the good in creating a national economy and decentralizing this whole phenomenon.
How do we start that?
I think it's already started. So if we look at least in cybersecurity, BIS, to their credit, have created these kind of clusters. So if we look at Malvern, which is, way outside of London, is actually becoming a technology hub for startups in working in a very niche discipline. Yes, they were fortunate to have Kinetic, a kind of a product of privatization, to create the skills. But then they've also then realized that people aren't going to stay there forever. So let's create the kind of the network of facilities required to get businesses started, get them working together, and then get BIS kind of helping promote through UKTI overseas what we have there.
So I'll give you another example, which goes to the point that technology in other sectors has power. We've just launched an industrial strategy for agri-tech. 21st century farming is going to be very exciting. It's about delivering more from less, using less water, chemical, land, energy. We've put £180 million, not a lot of money, but leadership into a vision of Britain leading the way in global 21st century sustainable agriculture. Massive data opportunity. It's all about big data. There are companies, I met one last week, they're using satellite data on in-field disease patterns to show farmers where you spray. Just spray where the disease is. Don't waste all the money spraying the whole field. Consumers don't like it, we don't need it, it's costly. So we're going to launch an international centre for agricultural metrics and data. It's not going to be in Tech City, it's going to be in Norwich. If I get my way, it'll be in Norwich. It'll be somewhere between Norwich and Cambridge. And that's going to feed a cluster of 21st century sustainability metrics companies. Now,
See,
we
we
could do that all around
never
the
do
country.
this in the U.S. That's pretty amazing. I have to say that. That's an amazing that we have an interactive government, a government that responds, that listens and can care, because there's no way I could get that legislation through Capitol Hill. Go ahead.
You said, how can we get started now?
Yeah.
I think you should get the kids and the university kids. So there was a competition that was launched last week by all of the nationwide companies like Apps for Good and Code Club and Founders for Schools and a few others. And they've made a challenge to every child in the country to in September, think up an app they want to create, not use, but create. What app do they want to create? What will it do? Will it tell the cafeteria in the school that they don't like macaroni and cheese? Will it be actually, the girls that I was speaking to last week wanted a work experience rating app. They wanted a way of telling the companies that they were getting work experience from that they didn't like it. And when I said, well, is this a girl app or a boy app? They said, no, girls want different work experience than boys. It's a girl app. So I was like, well, let's create it over the summer. They're going to upload. So the idea of the competition is they upload it sometime in October, and then we have a competition with every university in the UK, the coders, and they take these ideas that have been uploaded onto YouTube, created by these kids using their digital skills, and they code them in a giant hackathon. Now, that's something everybody can do today. It's, for the kids, it helps them understand that they're not just to play with the apps, that they're meant to create them and that they're created by people all around them. And then, in 10 years' time, they won't have to pass off to the university students because they'll have the coding abilities themselves. But the university students at the moment, you see what they do at hackathons, they're like, well, we want to know what would be really useful. So having a call out from a bunch of kids 5 or 6 years younger than them for the things that would be really meaningful to them is good. Now, celebrating something like that could change the culture overnight from a using culture into a creating culture. It also helps them understand how you mix up the engineering talent with the people who have communication capabilities that maybe don't want to be mathematicians or coders. And that's really important to the point that you made earlier. It's working in teams that works in business. And from business, one of the talents, you don't want to have somebody who's just so pure, deep mathematician that they can't speak to others. They want to work in a team. And those skills and getting them to think in teams about the problems they want to solve together can create a revolution overnight, and that's all around the country.
Yeah, I think this challenge as put forward of ensuring that tech growth is evenly distributed is a really tough one, because there's a paradox, I think, in the technology age, which is that while technology might be obliterating distance and we can work with anyone anywhere, clustering and proximity matters more than ever. It's an odd thing, but true. Innovation, patent generation is more strongly correlated with certain urban centres today than it was 20, 30 years ago. So the old sort of idea that we could be sat at a computer in the middle of nowhere, contributing to a big sort of innovation economy, hasn't really turned out to be true. Certain clusters are pulling away. So I think the response of the guys here is absolutely right, which is how do we help support clusters? I created an initiative called Tech City, which was about supporting what at the time was a very little cluster in East London, which has really grown. And our best shot at that is our universities. And so while Britain is heinously over-centralised when it comes to politics and finances, it's incredibly distributed when it comes to our universities. And, all over the country, we have great universities. And I think one of my frustrations, one of the things that, I'm sad I wasn't able to do more on in government was, doing more about the fact that our universities produce fantastic research, but the translation of that research into the economy, into the tech economy, is really broken. We don't do this in the way that the Americans do it, in the way that the Israelis do it, and it's really holding our country back. And it's not only a problem for kind of GDP growth nationally, it's a problem for Newcastle, and it's a problem for Glasgow. It's a problem for cities across the UK that have fantastic universities and actually should have more technology jobs, should have more high-paid jobs than they do. It's a real problem. And that voice of commercialisation in government, there's people like George Freeman, but there's not actually an institutional voice for it. The voice of academia has phenomenal clout. So we really need to think that through as a country. Otherwise, we really will lose out, which would be a shame.
So can I just add to that? So I think industry's not blameless here. So I know that we've realised the kind of the opportunity that academia presents in terms of developing and kind of researching technology that we need, but we've had to go out and develop those relationships. So we've chosen universities in Glasgow or Edinburgh and kind of non-typical centres for at least our industry, and we've been welcomed with open arms because we've gone to them and said, we have these sets of problems, we don't have the time or inclination necessarily to research. Do you need input? And they go, yes, we need lots of input for third years at bachelor's, or we need masters, and even going into kind of PhD land, they gladly take investment for very focused, commercially driven research for good. So I think industry has as much to do as government and academia in terms of reach out, I think.
All right, final thoughts, guys. Any questions? Or Mike Butcher, sorry. Mike, do you want to run over here and grab a mic?
I've got one.
Okay.
Just where the rules.
Sorry.
Can I steal a microphone?
Yes.
Otherwise, I'll have to shout.
Welcome, Mike Butcher,
Hello.
everyone.
Mike Butcher, TechCrunch journalist. Fantastic. There was a piece, a little paragraph in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which written by Douglas Adams, where they'd shipped all the telephone sanitizers off to another planet. So, God help the lawyers and the accountants of the future. What's going to happen to them? I hope they all join this technology startup. But a vaguely serious point, which is that a lot of the things that you're talking about are going to have to be built, as you say, on big data, on things which the UK produces, which is a natural resource, like a mineral almost. But a lot of it is also wrapped up in things like privacy. And there has been a lot of scandals around, for instance, NHS privacy data being sold to insurance companies and things like that. So on one hand, we have this natural resources of big data, and on the other hand, we also look towards government to curate and to protect the data that is owned by citizens. And what's going to be the commercialization aspect of that doesn't therefore infringe our citizen rights?
It's a brilliant question, I think.
Yeah,
obviously, this bites right across the economy. Social network data, Google, all across the economy. I think the most interesting debate is health data, because as Sherry says, as Mike just said there, the UK has this incredible natural advantage, which is the NHS. We collect our data in a way that is standardised, unlike, say, the Americans, which is a much more kind of fractured system, different hospitals having their own types of health records and so on. So we have this amazing opportunity, and it's an opportunity because medicine is increasingly becoming a big data challenge. And the role of genetics in healthcare, personalised medicine, all of that is shifting medicine and life sciences towards this big data era. And to Mike's point, that opens up profound questions about privacy. I worked with George on the UK's life science strategy. It was something that we instigated back in 2011. And one of the big changes in that, we were launching this on a Monday. And on the Friday, I was sat with the Prime Minister, and we were going through the speech, he was going to launch this new report. And he said, is there anything in here that's contentious? That's what Prime Ministers should ask before they read something out. And I said, well, we're going to be changing the default of patient data so that patients need to opt out if they don't want their patient data to be shared anonymously with researchers and third parties. And he said, "Okay, well, we've agreed that policy. It's a sensible policy for the future." That was a Friday we had that conversation. The front page of the Sunday Telegraph was private companies own your health data. It's kind of big scandal. And on the Monday, the Prime Minister stood up to give this speech, and I was standing in the back of the room. And it got to the bit of the speech that was about health data, and the Prime Minister did something that you never want to hear a Prime Minister do, which is veer off the script and start ad-libbing. And to his eternal credit, what he was doing was saying to the audience, look, I know that this this data change is contentious. But I think all of us who use the NHS, or many of us use the NHS, want to contribute to make that system better. And a 21st century form of social contract with the NHS is one in which we don't just pay our taxes to get a better NHS, but we also share our data in new ways if we choose to. And that is for the common good. And that debate went away for a while. It reared its head again, as Mike says. But I think actually politicians, the media, have a huge responsibility here to ensure that the public debate is rational and considered, because it's the easiest thing in the world to whip up a scare story. And it's a very difficult thing to explain the kind of dynamic long-term benefits to us as patients, the NHS as a system, to the UK as an economy of these kinds of privacy changes. But it's so important. So, Mike, I'm looking forward to an editorial in TechCrunch making the case for these reforms. It's so important.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you in advance for that, Mike.
I'll just add to that, which is we have seen, rightly, kind of certain exposés on what was thought to be anonymised data being de-anonymised. So it will always be a trade-off when we collect this data and we look to share it with individuals in terms of, you can almost think of it like a slider bar. The less we de-anonymise it, the more useful it is, but the higher the risk of re-identification. And that will continue to be a problem with data as we kind of aggregate it and share it. And it's not to say it's insurmountable, but it will kind of, as these examples keep being brought up, and we saw an example only last week, people will continually ask that question. So there will be very much the kind of the privacy debate ongoing.
Okay, one question over here.
George,
oh, do you want to
make a point?
Go ahead.
Shall I stand up?
Yes, stand up. Tell us who you are.
I'm Mark Horniff, Coata Studios. One of the things my studio does is we go into schools and we teach kids to code. And
awesome.
It's great. And one of the things they are acutely aware of is what environment they're about to move into, the future they're going, and the skills that they need. And as was identified already and mentioned several times, we all have a responsibility to pass on the skills to the entrepreneurs of the future and to new students. But talking to teachers, they are phenomenally aware that they aren't as skilled and don't have the skills needed to impart on. So my question for the panel is, how do we get the teachers to a point where they can focus on skills and they can be content providers?
Well, I think focusing on the value that they can add. I mean, I think you'll see some things in informal education that empower. So I'm part of Raspberry Pi, and we participated in creating a MOOC in computing for GCSE. First time in this country, it was at secondary school level rather than university. And the teachers are using that to upskill themselves before they need to go into the classroom and teach it. And we make a point of putting examples in there that are inspirational and gender appropriate, i.e. there's both examples that are interesting to girls and boys, so that they can light the kids' imaginations on fire. And that was put in place to empower teachers to understand how they reached this challenge in the class. The other thing that I think is things like Apps for Good and Code Club and what you're doing, and there's Raspberry Jams and there's the Founders for Schools, getting their role models in. There's nationwide services today that are free, that are available to every single teacher, and it helps them achieve phenomenal things. 3 times the percentage of kids choose to study STEM afterwards. 96% of them are inspired. 87% say they want to start their own business afterwards. That's after one 1-hour session. They're here. I wish I knew how to get every teacher reaching out for these services, but they are around. They've been created in the last 3 or 4 years. But in terms of the evidence that supports the outcomes that they're providing, there's overwhelming granular data that shows the impact that it's having. So I think maybe that's something that the media can help us get the word out. And at the moment, 100% of the teachers are recommending these to other teachers, and they're booking to do it again immediately. And that's good. I mean, in terms of a viral coefficient or a net promoter score, that's fantastic. I think we just need to let teachers know that it's okay and that it's high impact and it's safe. And it's great for their kids, and it means they can focus on what they do best.
And all I'll add is I don't think vocational training should be a dirty word. And I think sometimes in technology, it's not they're not so tightly coupled as they maybe are in plumbing or building or kind of mechanics. I think that you see certain individuals who will never be academics, and I wasn't one, but, I found a calling to technology very early on and found an inspirational teacher that kind of recognized that and allowed me to focus on what naturally became my career. And I think, doing that more at grassroots, we will kind of create just a hungry workforce at 17, and I think that's a good thing.
Final thoughts?
Yes, a couple of thoughts. The first is this is an area where actually technology could help. In Norfolk, in my constituency, we're not going to turn every primary and secondary school teacher into a fully competent 21st century compliant tech instructor. Right. But we could use technology to take some of those modules and courses out into the schools so that children can plug in and hook it up. And there's a whole tele-education, e-education revolution in productivity. I mean, we take, to Jim's point, Norfolk every morning spends a fortune shipping kids into really expensive old buildings where we give them something we call education, and then we ship them all back again. It costs a fortune. There is a different model as well. I'm not suggesting at the end of schools, but we could do some of this teaching back in the communities where they live, using technology to take stuff out to them. Second point, there is a cultural aspect to this. I think we've got far too little interaction between businesses in schools. The solution will be local, not national. I'm doing a little thing in my patch this autumn. I'm launching the Norfolk Science and Technology Awards, and I'm hooking all the schools in, and there'll be prizes and awards given by local tech companies. It'll be work experience for a week in a tech company. Wow. The best teacher in a secondary school, the best O-level GCSE science project with work experience, little prizes, but to get people in Norfolk realising it is a premier science and technology county doing 21st century technology. But that is not how it feels in a comprehensive in Lowestoft or Yarmouth or Cromer. But there's a cultural aspect to this. People have got to be proud of what they've got locally and make sure that the children locally are proud as well.
Well, on that note, guys, we're going to have to cut the panel, but thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much, Tech City Insider and C21 Media. Thank you, George, for hosting us. Everybody, can we put a round of applause together for George? Thank you for hosting us.